All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you're at. Thank you for joining us today for this special meetup live stream edition. My name is Ian, go by Engelad Online, and I have Mike Bostock and Philip Riviere here
Oh,
with. Yeah. And if you don't know, um, Mike and Phil have been doing a lot of work lately putting out D3 6.0. And so that's what we're gathered here to talk about today. If you have questions, we'll be in the chat. And yeah, before we get started with our discussion, I just want to plug that we have been running a survey for the D3 community, which we're going to use to help figure out, right, like what kind of stuff goes in the next version, how we can better serve community. So I'm going to put a link to that in the chat real quick. And please, if you haven't yet, help us fill it out. We're actually gonna close the survey, I think, the end of the day today. It's been running for a little while, and we'd like to analyze the data, and we're also gonna share the data, anonymized, of course, for folks in the community to try to understand as well. So please do that if you can. Yeah. So Mike, Phil, what's going on?
good morning. For those that are curious, by the way, I did break my shoulder recently, so that's what the sling is on here. And actually, that's why we had to reschedule it from last week. So sorry to those of you who showed up last week and missed out and are back again. Thank you for coming back.
Yes.
Thank you for bearing with me.
Well, thank you for joining us even as you recover. You did mention that you're still able to type though, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm getting better, so
Nice. Nice.
it's not impaired my ability to code new D3 examples, which is the
Yeah.
important thing. That's what matters, people.
Clearly has not impeded your yes. Um, yeah. And how are you doing, Phil?
I'm fine. It's hot here in France, so 9 hours away, but yeah, quite a lot of heat in the day.
Nice. Well, hopefully we can chill out and talk some D3. I mean, yeah, it's a new version, a new major version, right? Sometimes that means a ton of breaking changes depending on the project. Sometimes it means a ton of new features. Like, how would you guys characterize what 6.0 means for D3?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of people I think are still burned in a sense from the D3 V3 to D3 V4 migration, which was fairly dramatic or traumatic, depending on your perspective. And in that migration, I think that a lot of the change was really about the modularity of D3, basically taking D3 from a single monolithic library, breaking it up into 30 or so different modules, which required the great flattening of the D3 namespace, which is one of the things that made it so disruptive. But for, let's see, V5, that was a pretty minor upgrade in the sense of the main thing it was changing there was shifting from callbacks to promises so that you could use async await, which just makes any sort of asynchronous programming that much more convenient within JavaScript. So we really wanted to, embrace that. And I think V6 is more in that same vein, where it's largely about, keeping up to date with JavaScript as it modernizes. So there's new iterable and iterator protocols in JavaScript and new collections like map and set that are really great to use or really convenient that didn't exist, in 2011 when D3 first came out. And so we wanted to take advantage of those. And so there are some compatibility changes for D3 V6, but it's pretty small. I think it's probably larger than D3 V5 because we did a couple other things that we'll get into, like replacing D3 Voronoi with D3 Delaunay and the change to D3 event. But I think, Phil's written a great migration guide, and we've seen a lot of uptake in D3.6 already. So hopefully it's not an automatic upgrade, but it's relatively painless. That's my hope.
Nice. I'm going to put this link I have open on my browser in the chat, which is the release description, right? The release notes with the changes. And then you mentioned Phil's migration guide, which I'll pull up quickly and share as well in the chat so people can follow along if they haven't had a chance to see this. One thing, to your point about it not being the hardest migration to make either, is that we've had some folks in the community already adopt it pretty quickly. So I wanted to shout out to John Guerra Gomez, who ported the entire, there's this Learn.js data tutorial that has been, I believe he uses in a Berkeley DataVis class that he teaches. So this guide is a community created guide, and then it's all updated to version 6 now. So that's pretty awesome. And I'll put that in the chat as well. So, and I thought I saw that Vega was updated to V6 as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. They did that just a couple days after, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I think even they were already using some of the individual modules. So, I hinted at the modularity of D3. That was something we did way back in V4. But the idea is, you can pick and choose the different parts of D3 that you want to use. It's no longer a monolithic library. So if you want to use just, D3 array, or if you want to use just D3 color or D3 interpolate, you can depend on those directly rather than depending on the D3 bundle of everything. And so I think Vega was already just depending on this, just the bundles, or just the individual modules that they use. And they had already upgraded, because a couple things like D3 Array 2 and D3 Scale 3 have actually already been available for a few months. And it was really just sort of everything downstream of that, like all together, and the D3 selection changes that really got done just recently for D3.6.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, out of all these changes, and some, you've mentioned a couple of specific modules, like what are you guys maybe most excited about, like something new that came out in this release, and that maybe we could take a look at and check it out?
You want to go first, Philippe?
Yeah. I think the transition to D3 Delaunay is really exciting, because it's a module that's been already published and working for quite a few years now, or maybe 2 years. And it's working very well. It's super fast. And if you just like to use Voronoi, then it's a great change. It's faster, it's more accurate, and it really opens new possibilities for interactions. So yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
the old D3 Voronoi was based on the fortunes algorithm, and it computes the Voronoi first, and then it had some Delaunay methods so the Delaunay triangulation is the dual of the Voronoi tessellation. So once you have one, you can compute the other fairly directly. And so the old approach was you'd compute the Voronoi, and then you would compute the Delaunay from it. The new approach is you compute the Delaunay, and then you can compute the Voronoi from it. So it's flipping the direction. And there are some algorithms that are basically just much faster for computing the Delaunay triangulation. And that's why D3 Delaunay is able to be much faster, because it's doing it in the opposite direction on this better algorithm. And that algorithm was implemented by Vladimir Agafonkin in the Delaunator library published by Mapbox. So basically what we did is we added the Voronoi calculation on top of the Delaunay, and then we worked together to sort of improve some of the small improvements to the API for Delaunaytor. Phil, do you want to talk about the GeoVoronoi? Because I think that's like a really exciting extension of this.
So my focus is cartography, right? And and so it's counter cartography. And so each time there's an algorithm somewhere on the plane, I'm trying to see if we can use it on the sphere, because I want everything to work on a globe and not on the plane. So I was stuck with the Voronoi, the spherical Voronoi. I couldn't make it work with. I tried several algorithms and implementations, and everything was slow and was breaking. And finally, with this implementation of Delaunaytor and D3 Delaunay, I was able to find a way to basically take all the points that are on the sphere and project them onto the plane, compute the Delaunay on the plane, and then remesh it as a sphere. So it's a bit tricky when you want to remesh, because there are no connections at the infinite points around. But with this, the precision that's in the new system, it was really it became feasible, and it's quite exciting to be able to. In this example, for example, we have I think it's airports, all the world's airports, and for each point of the globe, we can identify which airport is the closest and make those shapes. And it's all. It's not a raster calculation. It's really, we really have the exact coordinates in spherical on the sphere, like longitude and latitude. That's really great when you want to work with exact computations on the globe. And that's, I mean, at the beginning, that's what drove me to D3, right? Because the centroids and everything, all the geo computations were exact, or at least trying to be exact, and not like some approximation based on a projection. And yeah, so that was really exciting to work with.
That's awesome. And I'm just looking. I've scrolled down while you're chatting to look, and so it's really just, these are the longitude latitude points, right? So the exact coordinates of the airports, and you pass that into D3 Voronoi, and you create a mesh, and that gives you GeoJSON. So then you're working with standard stuff to visualize, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything is staying in the same coordinate system. Well, of course,
think there's a Delaunay fork of that one, or maybe it's the parent of that notebook, if people want to see the other one. Yeah, there you go. World Airports Delaunay.
Oh, okay, so these are the triangles that it makes.
Yes.
Yeah, where the airports are the points, or the vertices of the triangles, right? Okay, so
so one of the other cool features of this we could talk about is and Phil hinted at this, but there's a new Delaunay find method. So you can use it to efficiently find the closest point given any other point. And there's kind of a cool notebook for that if you want to show it.
Yeah. This one about tooltips, or did you have a different one in mind? I can pull.
No, it's the Delaunay find notebook. Here, I'll link it. It's in the chat.
Okay, I'll pull this up.
The idea is that you have this topology already. All these links, there are links that show that are connected to a notion of distance. So if you want to find the closest point on the mesh to your target point, basically what you have to do is you take a point at random, and then you look at all its neighbors in the topology, And if you find a point in the neighbors that is closest to your target point, you just jump to it and you start again. And basically by doing this, you reach your target in square roots of the number of points, because they are, like it's a 2D system. So basically, the longest way is about the square root of the number of points. And it's nice. Maybe it's not the best or the fastest system to retrieve a point by spatial indexing, but it's really nice to use the same topology to move around, to explore the space.
Yeah, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see there's an animation of the algorithm.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that one.
It shows the path.
So this is going.
So like sometimes people, use these data structures for interaction. So, one of the common techniques is like you have a scatter plot and you're mousing over and you want to find the closest point to the mouse so that you can highlight it or show a tooltip or something like that. And there's a variety of ways that you can do that. And, in the common case, like you can also just scan over all the points and compute the distance that way. And oftentimes that's fast enough. But if you use the Voronoi, there's some tricks that you can do with like invisible SVG elements in order to just have the browser basically do it on a hover. You don't need to do the search. Or you can use a Quadri, or you can use Delaunay now in order to find the closest point. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, so this is an example where there's many, many points, and I think, Phil, you used Find to make these tooltips, right?
I use it everywhere. I don't even think about it now. Another excellent example is, I'm going to send you a URL. Where is this?
This segment. Okay, I need to also put some of these links in the chat.
So
you're going to have to close your tabs. I think your browser's going to die.
It's because running the stream and lots of cool visualizations. So Find, it's already in the chat. Cool. All right, so we're walking on spheres.
Yeah, so in this example, it's the Delaunay find is used to compute this raster super fast. Because one great feature of Delaunay find is that if you remember the last position you were in, if we are going through all the pixels one by one, if you found a solution for one pixel, then the next pixel just nearby is probably has probably the same solution, the same closest point. So, and that's, you can tell Delaunay find to reuse the previous solution. And so that means that it's O of one. Like for every pixel, for almost every pixel, you just verify that there is no better neighbor than the solution you found before. So it's really instant. And that's what allows to make this drawing super fast, even though it could be fast.
Very nice. Well,
what are the points on the Delaunay for this example?
To find the closest points, and the points, there are all the segments that you see are like 100 points.
Ah, okay. So you've got multiple points along each line.
Yes.
There's someone in chat asked, hey, it's Curran. Hey, Curran. What's the asymptotic running time of Voronoi find? I'm curious how it compares to Quadri.
Yeah.
Because I think people, like, I know I was used to using Quadri for this, like a similar find functionality.
Yeah, well, it depends if you're asking in theory or in practice, right? So In theory, it's if you reuse the previous point, it's O of 1 when it's I mean for almost all points, and then for some of them it's O of square root of n. That's the theory. And for
assuming you've already built the Delaunay.
And for the quadtree, it's log of n, right? Because each time you divide by 4. So it depends on n, and it depends on the implementation. It's not only based on theory. So you have to measure it, right?
Mm.
It's not as simple as just yeah, the theoretical value. Anyway.
Makes sense. I also noticed that I believe this is Alex Garcia asked a little bit earlier. How do you keep track of the hundreds of D3 examples in terms of like updating them, testing, readability?
Brute force, just a lot of work. Yeah, Philippe did some tremendous amount of grunt work to update hundreds of examples, and I chipped in a little bit too. I think certainly it helps having them on Observable. It's just really easy to go in and edit them and republish and keep them up to date. And that's been true, even prior to D3.6. Sometimes we come up with new techniques that are not like changes in the library, but basically like they're better patterns for how to use D3. So like I guess this is a change, but a backwards compatible change. But like another one is the selection join, which was added within the last, certainly within the last couple years, but it was just a new feature. So it was a minor upgrade. I think it was D3 selection 1.4, if I'm recalling correctly. But selection join is a new pattern for the general data join pattern. So it's a way of entering, exiting, and updating elements. Yeah, there's a nice notebook there that sort of shows how it works. So we had all these old examples that were, of course, doing the enter, select all data, enter, append, and then the merge, and then exit, remove, and that sort of thing. And those are all now greatly simplified with the selection join method that was added. So we went through and updated those. And it's just nice that you kind of like, I'll randomly land on an example because, I'm answering a question, or I'm just looking at something, or I'm making a new example with some new data set or something like that. And then I'll look at it and I'm like, oh, this example needs to be updated. And it's like, type, click, publish, and you're updated. And it's only a couple seconds, which helps, mitigate the cost of keeping these things up to date. Another thing that we want to do to make things easier, is like improving code search on Observable, so that we can easily find, all of the D3 notebooks that call a particular method. And then maybe in the longer future, we'll have some more sort of automated find and replace for like bulk changes across notebooks, which would make this a lot easier. Because like, even if you know all of the notebooks, like we end up opening like 400 tabs in order to just keep track of what needs to be done and changing them and closing them. So, we get it done, but it's when we have 4,000 notebooks, a couple of years from now, then it'll be even worse. So hopefully we'll have bulk updates by then.
Nice. Well, funny enough, P Stuff in the chat had just asked right before you explained that if there was a recommendation how you might find notebooks that broke with V6 because they forgot to specify V5 in the past, and D3 Nest is a breaking thing.
So yeah, sorry. One of the things that we want to do that we haven't done yet, but that sort of like has just started, or at least we've planned it out and we're starting to make progress on it, is version pinning for notebooks. And the idea is that we want something that's going to be equivalent to yarn install or yarn add, where it captures the version of whatever you add to your notebook in this case, and its transitive dependencies, so that when you require D3, you don't have to worry about that changing in the future and breaking your notebooks. But for now, we recommend, and all of the D3 examples have done this basically from the beginning. So we recommend that you follow this pattern. Is when you are requiring a library, you specify what the major version is of that library, right? So you would require D3 at 5 rather than D3, or you would require D3 at 6 if you want to use the latest version.
Cool. So there's another question in the chat from John with many names, as he said earlier. Is there any way we can help upgrading the old blocks that aren't yet on Observable? I have been moving them to Observable, but not sure what you guys prefer.
Yeah, you just at me and I will probably be prodded to port them over. I mean, I think it helps, if you want to take a crack at it yourself, but I've found that oftentimes, there's a lot of different ways that you can port them. And I really try to think about what the most idiomatic way is to represent them. So I hinted at that before, where there's a lot of kind of best practices for D3, or idiomatic practices, I guess. And I think part of the value of the examples is to try to sort of reiterate those practices again and again and again, so that if you are copying them or if you're forking them or whatever, that hopefully you start to kind of internalize those patterns. And so looking at some of the older examples, that haven't been updated because they're not on Observable, I try to not just trivially port them over, but to think about, what is the most idiomatic way to represent this code now, given all of the new features in D3 of the JavaScript language and perhaps of Observable, if you're talking about reactivity. Yeah, you can at me, on all channels, Twitter, Slack, email, the Observable forum, that sort of thing. Yeah, or just port it yourself, and then I will look at it and be like, oh, well, I would be better if we did it, with this particular style instead. It's like that. What's that rule, right? That the quickest way to get an answer on the internet is to post the wrong answer.
Yeah. And can we mention in comments in Observable right now?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Or I think you can also comment on the gallery, for example, if you want to see something there.
Mm-hmm. So let's say someone ported like a bar chart one, they could add a comment and say, hey, here's a link to my example, and it'll get discussed there. Cool. Awesome. So I put the gallery in the chat. All right, we've gone. It'd be nice if we had a Delani.find for D3 examples, right? We can get the closest example to what you're doing.
Yeah, then we would need what's it, TSNE or what's that new one? UMAP, yeah.
UMAP, dimensionality reduction of it. Which reminds me, there was something, Phil, you had made, which is still Delani related. This Urquhart, how do you pronounce this?
Urquhart. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's a Scottish name, I guess.
And
so yeah, that's a very, very nice algorithm. It's if you want to draw an imaginary city, for example, you would just sprinkle dots at random, and not uniform random, like sprinkle dots, more dots in some place and less in some other place, and then you let Urquhart draw the roads, and it really makes a good job of connecting everything in a sparse way. Like not all these triangles of the LNA, it eliminates many edges, but it still keeps a global connectivity. And it's super useful if you want to generate a random graph, for example, for or something. I really like this algorithm, and it's native in the Geo version because it's so nice.
There's a couple other ones I posted in the Twitch chat of algorithms that are implemented on top of Delani triangulation. If you want to bring that one up, the minimum spanning tree is kind of a fun one to watch.
Minimum spanning tree. Okay, let me get that over here. And I'll put this one. And I just heard from Carrie that it's pronounced Urquhart.
Urquhart, right. Thanks.
Minimum spanning tree. Let me replay this. Nice.
So it's basically just exploring out, starting from one point and pushing all of these gray edges onto the heap, and then figuring out which is the shortest edge to add, and then sort of pruning the tree, pruning the exploration until it's completely covered all of the points in the graph so that they're all connected into a tree, producing this thing called the minimum spanning tree. But it's just kind of a fun thing to watch. And then there's another example of just the nearest neighbors particles. That's the second link I had, which is basically each. If you want to bring that one up.
Yeah.
So here, like each dot is connected to its closest neighbor in the graph, and they're just sort of walking around randomly.
Nice.
It's better. It's better at 60 frames per second. I think your computer is starting a little bit. We'll have to get you a Mac Pro for the streaming.
Yeah, it is having many interesting simulations and visualizations is pushing it. Nice. So I did notice there's a question in the chat about D3 patterns and best practices being articulated somewhere. Is there a best source, like talks, that we could point to, do you think?
Yeah, so I think there are the tutorials that we've been writing, and then there are also sort of just the API documentation and examples. So I don't think there's a single kind of exhaustive list, but the Learn D3 tutorials I think has a good sort of gradual introduction to the parts you want to learn and how to use them. And then I think also, we've been kind of doing it incrementally. That's part of the challenge, right? So when we come up with a new practice, or a new pattern, like the selection join, we'll write a notebook that sort of shows you how to use it, and then we'll update all of the examples to use that pattern. But there isn't sort of a single list of all of them. I think we need to do more in the way of extending this series of tutorials to try to capture that stuff.
That seems like it could be useful. When people... Oh, I just lost my chat, so I can't read the question again. But the idea of... Yeah, like we've talked, there's lots of examples, so you can kind of interpolate the patterns from reading lots of them, and then there's tutorials. I think also it'd be worth calling out that there are a number of courses, like online video courses that members of the community have made, as well as some books that people have written, and those can take you sort of start 0 to 60, kind of get you up to date depending on where you are in your learning or the way that you like to learn. I feel some people like reading, some like watching. And right now, I'm not sure the best place to find like the list of all those things, but I know on the wiki there is resources that the community have collected. And so I'm going to drop this in the chat as well. So folks,
yeah, and I want to update the D3 homepage as well. Of what D3 is, because we haven't we haven't sort of changed the language there too much since D3 was first created. A lot of it there is talking about selections, which is certainly like an important part of D3. But I think now in particular that, D3 is much more modular, and oftentimes people are using D3 in conjunction with some other framework, some other DOM framework, like they're using Svelte or they're using React. In that case, you want to use probably different parts of D3, and depending on which style you want to use, but you might just be using D3 scale or D3 hierarchy or D3 array rather than using D3 selection.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, well, one thing I'll point out is that Curran mentioned he's putting together a list of educational resources in the chat, so folks can check that out as well, in the form of an awesome list. So that's cool. This looks useful. And speaking, I don't. This is something that I've been playing with, and I've shared with the two of you, and I just like bring over real quickly, but I've been trying to visualize the different modules in D3 recently, as we've been talking about. It's more than just selection. So like this is selection, this smaller green box, and these are sized by the number of methods, which obviously isn't it's a proxy for what's going on in there, but yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I've seen, Mike, you talk about there's these different higher level categories of how, like, the functionality that D3 you can use D3 for. And this helps me at least see it a little bit more all at once. I want to, and there's a couple more, there's a whole discussion going on in the chat, but let's see, there's been a few questions. So one, regarding learning D3 and Observable, how well does that then translate to writing D3 code outside of Observable? Do you address that in the tutorial? And maybe, well, Mike, I feel like you've answered this a few times recently. Maybe I can give it a shot and you can correct me.
If you want, I'm happy to do it too.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that, so there's two parts to this question. Like, do we address it directly in the tutorial? I believe that probably mentioning like this tutorial, but which I don't know if it's like explicitly stated in there. But I think that, it's important to kind of notice that, like, D3 as a JavaScript library. Oh, interesting. I'm just noticing that the comment right above this is talking about what exactly is D3, being like a useful thing in terms of a high-level view. And all right, so I think, Mike, you should answer this, because I totally like derailed myself trying to keep up with it.
So I think one way I think about it is, like, to me, there's a distinction between D3 the library and D3 the examples. So D3 the library, is very low level, right? There are, I don't remember exactly how many, but I think it's like there's over 1,000 methods collectively in the D3 modules. And so, when we talk about, can you use the examples that we give on Observable outside of Observable? The vast majority of all of our examples they're just vanilla JavaScript, right? It's showing you how to use the D3 API, where it's like you're calling, D3 interpolate, or you're calling D3 scale or something like that, or you're using D3 Delaunay, and there's no observable isms in there if you're just considering sort of an individual snippet of code in terms of, like, this is how I use this part of the D3 API. And so one of our goals is really just to teach people the D3 APIs, like show them how they work by giving lots of examples. And the nice thing about it being an observable is those examples can be interactive. You can edit the code and see what happens. So if you want to learn how to use D3 format or something like that, right, which is for number formatting, or you want to use D3 time format, like, it's a great environment because we can show you hundreds of examples, and you can also tinker with them to see how they work. I think the challenge comes when people look at sort of a much more complete example, which isn't really teaching you directly sort of what the D3 APRs are, but more sort of like inspirational stuff, right? So you'd look at something like an animated tree map, and it's not just using a single API, right? The goal of that example is not to teach you like the D3 tree map API, like, because the D3 tree map code in that example is like probably 4 lines of code or something like that. And we have another notebook, I think, that may give you a better, or maybe the API reference is sort of a better overview of what the options are there. And so the challenge is, when people want to just copy and paste that entire example working in their local environment, and that doesn't work very well. Because that example takes advantage of a number of the observable features that make that code simpler and observable, right? So namely, like it does automatic promise resolution, where you load the data and you don't have to worry about awaiting it. It just happens automatically because it's a cell. And then maybe it might use some other features like for our animation, or it might use interaction support, where you don't have to explicitly add event listeners for things. Like you just use data flow, and when a value changes, like the cells that are downstream. So our first level goal is really to teach people the D3 APIs, because our hope is that, if you really understand how the APIs work, you can use D3 to do whatever you want. You're not limited to the set of examples that we're providing in the gallery. You can create new stuff. And that's the stuff that like really excites me, is when people create new things, when they're doing things that we couldn't anticipate or have imagined, and they're really kind of pushing the envelope in terms of what's possible with visualization in the browser. Now, there are often ways where you can take those examples and you can sort of port them back into vanilla JavaScript and remove the observable isms. We haven't really done too much in terms of trying to come up with a workflow for that. There is a notebook that's called Observables Not JavaScript, which gives you kind of a bullet list of what the differences are between observables, reactive JavaScript, and normal vanilla JavaScript. And you can use that a little bit as a guideline. But ultimately, I think one of two things is going to be more successful. One is like just learn the D3 API yourself, and figure out how to compose those things rather than trying to copy paste the example. Or the second thing is, use Observable's embedding feature, where you're just taking that example kind of as is, and you're using the runtime embedded on your own application or your own website. Because the whole runtime is open source, and it's a tiny layer. It's much smaller than the D3 library, and you can download any example and sort of replace the data, or even override certain features, or do sort of deep integration with your React app. And then you don't really have to worry about what the differences are between observable syntax and JavaScript syntax, because it's just compiled into pure vanilla JavaScript anyway.
Nice. There's, I guess a related question from Songbogan is it high time to move to the let const arrow function world from the old var world?
I mean, in your own code, or are you asking like for the D3 library? I think we've been doing it incrementally in the D3 library, but I think there's a lot of churn when you have a lot of code, and it doesn't really add that much value, I think, to switch everything from var to let and const. So it hasn't really been so much of a priority for us. I think we'll do it, at some point, but I'm more focused on new features and the things that really help make, like, whether we use let or const internally, it doesn't make a difference externally for consumers of D3. It might help you, like if you want to kind of copy paste the D3 implementation to derive something for yourself, for that to be up to date. So that's why I do want to do it eventually. And if you were writing code from scratch today, I use let and const for everything.
Nice. And I guess that sort of transitions into another question about Big Pictures is asking, is there a D3 or observable roadmap anywhere? They're especially interested in tighter React integration observable and more complete TypeScript bindings for D3.
We haven't really shared a public roadmap yet. I mean, obviously we have a roadmap internally at Observable, and we do sometimes signal of things that we're planning on building. Like I mentioned, version pinning already as an example of something that we want to add to Observable in the future. We also don't have too much yet, I think, of a roadmap for D3. We had a 6.0 roadmap, and I think we're still kind of reflecting a little bit of what we want to do next. There are some things that we've been thinking about. For example, whether D3 hierarchy should be made more immutable, and whether like D3 scale might have some sort of redesign there. But I think in general, I tend to be fairly conservative about it because I've I've heard a lot of the pain that people have with upgrading when things are not backwards compatible, and so it's certainly much easier to add things rather than to change things. Um, I have some other improvements to D3 array. I mean, it was funny. We've talked about like what's in D3 6.0, but I feel like we spent the entire time talking about Delane and haven't even like scratched the surface of the other stuff that we've done. Like the D3 group and D3 rollup changes and D3 array, the removal of D3 event, that stuff. So like I think for me, I've been spending most of my time recently on D3 array, which is really kind of more like a Lodash equivalent, where it's really focused on the data transformation steps and aggregation steps. And I really love the new D3 group syntax. It feels much more powerful and concise than the old D3 nest. That's D3 group and D3 rollup. And then, yeah, there's a bunch of other kind of related stuff around there that we've been adding. And even some new stuff that I thought about releasing this morning as like D3 6.2, but I haven't quite gotten around to it yet. But so like there's a bunch of basic array methods. So for example, you can call array.filter, array.reverse, array.sort, array.map. Now those only work on the built-in array class and also typed arrays. But now that D3 array is more generic and works with any iterable, also works with map and set, for example, or works with generators, we have an outstanding PR that basically exposes those array-like functionality for any iterable. So you can take a map and then you can filter the contents of the map and get back a new array with the matching entries and just convenient stuff like that. Because obviously like the data transformation part is a huge part of visualization. It's the majority of visualization. It's easily 80% of the time is getting the data into the right format that you're then going to feed into the visualization. And only in the cases where you're really making something bespoke and custom does the actual cost of making the visualization start to be comparable or dwarf the amount of effort that you put into the data transformation step. So that's why I spend a lot of time thinking about D3 array, thinking about other data structures. I also want to give a shout out to the Arcaro, the new, it's like basically a layer on top of Apache Arrow, although I guess maybe it works with other stuff too, for doing data transformation with the columnar representation, so it's pretty fast. So I like stuff like this and thinking about how people do their data analysis and transformation and then feed it into a visualization.
Nice. I want to quickly point out that I shared a link to this D3 survey one more time in the chat because that'd be a great way for people to give feedback about what they want to see in the future for D3. And let's see. I also just want to point out, say thanks, Mike, from several of the folks that we've answered questions for have shared their appreciation.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah. And that, although, Paul Stuffa says, I know group and...
Stuffa, you got to get over it. You just forget about Nest, because group and roll up are where it's at. Like, it's just, there's no looking back.
I mean, I will also say, I only recently finally, bit the bullet and put Nest down. I've gotten really used to using it over the years. I sympathize, but once you actually get your maps back from group and you start, tying it in with other stuff, it actually is much nicer. So
Do you want to show the D3 group D3 hierarchy example? I feel like that's a pretty good example of why it's better.
yes. Where should I find that real quick?
That was in one of our link notebooks.
Oh, I see it. I got it. I'll put it in the chat as well.
Yeah.
Or wait, this isn't published, but you're seeing it here first, folks. So we have a group. We have our sports data, which is a simple data set of athletes, what sport they're in, and how much they earn. Use group to map it into a map of maps. So first by country and then by sports. So the United States has 2 basketball players here. And then we pass that group straight into D3 hierarchy.
So normally if you have one of these like D3 nest structures, you have to do some work in order to map it to a hierarchy. And the nice thing about this like map of maps is that it's designed to work directly with D3 hierarchy, and you don't really have to think so much about how to translate between those two things.
And for folks that aren't aware, once you have a D3 hierarchy, there is a large number of layouts you can generate from that, right? So,
and there's like the circle
tree
packing
map.
diagram at the bottom if you want to bring that up.
Oh, wait, where? Circle. Okay.
Yeah, that link there.
So here's a specific example. I think we've converted Paul. He's been convinced. Nice. Yeah. So this is doing a pack on some data. So let's see what data is. A big list of companies, I guess, in cities. And you're doing some rolling up, passing that into hierarchy.
Yeah, so for example, like if you wanted to change the order of that hierarchy, or if you want to remove one, so you could remove like D.city there, and then it would be just grouped by state and employer.
So you're saying if I remove city here. So let me look at the visualization real quick.
I think that'll work. I don't know.
If my computer doesn't complain.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Nice. So yeah, you could flip those around to decide, how to categorize things. Nice. Very cool. Put this in the chat. Oh, somebody shared a tidy tree map in the chat. Cool. Oh, look at that. A feature request was to make it easier ways to work with D3 hierarchy, and it's already done. So, does it work similarly as D3 stratifying? And actually, that's a good. You mentioned stratifying, Mike.
No, it's different. So, D3 group is a fixed hierarchy in the sense of you're telling it how many levels that you have based on the keys that you specify, right? So in this example of the H-1B employers, you're grouping first by state, then by city, then by company or employer, right? So there's always 3 levels to that hierarchy. Whereas with D3 stratify, it's some arbitrary tree so you might have like a folder hierarchy, for example. And in a folder hierarchy, you could have one folder that goes down like 10 or 15 levels and another folder that just only has 1 level. And so the tree can be irregular with D3 stratify. So it's more like D3 group is, every element gets assigned to sort of one set or one tuple of keys. And so it's a fixed structure or fixed depth in the hierarchy, whereas D3 stratify is more like a network where every element in your data set has one parent, and then that gets grouped together into a tree. So it's similar in the sense of like you take a tabular data structure and you convert it into a hierarchy, but it's different in that D3 Stratify is a much more general topological tree rather than a fixed grouping.
Got it. Nice. So I shared the Stratify in chat, so folks can spend more time with that. We only have a few minutes left. Is there any other example or thing that we want to mention and point out?
I mean, the D3 event change is like the other biggest thing to think about, if you're porting examples. That's, in fact, the most likely thing that you're going to need to change. The reason that we did that, so, as you probably know, if you use D3, D3 uses these accessor functions or like callback functions kind of everywhere throughout its API. So for example, if you have a selection and you want to set, the fill color on your plot, you can pass in a function there that lets the fill color be a function of data, right? So you can pass in a scale object, or you can write your own function that maps the data value to some particular color, and that's evaluated separately for each element in that selection. And so like kind of throughout D3's API, there were lots of places where you would pass in these functions and they would always take the data as the first argument, and then optionally the index as a second argument. And so we originally in D3's API, we mirrored that for event listeners. So if you had an event listener, you could similarly write your event listener as a function that takes data as the first argument and index in the selection as the second argument. And then if you needed to access the event, which very often you need to do in an event listener, there was this global called d3.event that was set temporarily while you were handling an event. And it worked, and it had this nice symmetry with other D3 accessor functions, but it's different than every other event listener framework. Like normally event listeners in JavaScript, like they take the event as the first argument. And there are also like some technical reasons why having a global is awkward. Like, so in the early days when people would write bundlers that would convert D3's ES module source into like CommonJS or sort of just pre-ES module JavaScript, they wouldn't respect the fact that ES module exports are live bindings, meaning that they can change. So sometimes there would be bugs there. And it just made it harder to use a custom bundler like Webpack on the D3 source. That's kind of mostly been fixed now. The bundlers are more consistent and reliable, but there's still, it's just a little bit weird to have this event global as a way of accessing the event rather than it being passed into the function. So with D3.6, we changed it, and now event is passed as the first argument, and D, the data, is passed as the second argument. And a small change is that the index isn't passed at all anymore, and that actually fixed a memory leak. So in order to send the index to event listeners, which was rarely needed anyway, we basically had to capture that information and bind it to the event listener, because the index is normally just a transient property of a selection. And when the selection goes away, like we don't need the index anymore. We don't need a reference to the selection. But to support this feature, we had to maintain a reference to the selection. And then that would sort of persist indefinitely as long as that event listener continued to exist. Whereas in the new design, we don't need any additional information because D3 binds the data to the element. That's a _data _ property on that element. And then the event, of course, comes from the native event listener, and we're just passing it through. So we don't need any additional state to provide these event listeners, which is nice.
Nice. Phil, you did quite a bit with this change, right? Like updating, you have the multi-touch notebook.
Yeah. When I started working on this upgrade, I thought that D3 Zoom would be the most difficult, so I started by this, and all this new event system was indeed quite difficult to work with, and now it's mostly fixed. And I was a bit sad that there was no new feature for user side, right? It was only the code was changing, but not the features themselves. So one thing I spotted was to use multi-touch on the D3 brush. So you can now brush on your tablet. You can brush the Mona Lisa example with 2 fingers. That's like the big change. And then I worked more on the multi-touch. All the events you need to serve and listen to and understand. And the documentation is a bit scattered because there are multiple APIs that are like adding, and sometimes they are in contradiction. So if you start to call one API, it will like stop the other one. Like if you do something on touch start, then it will stop some random mouse clicks to happening. So it's a bit complex, and I started to write this for myself, then realized it could be useful, to explain how to do multi-touch, maybe right. I don't know.
Nice.
Because Mike was
Yeah.
kept telling me what you're doing is leading to the wrong solution. So I wanted the right solution. I'm not sure I got it right, but it's better than what I was
Yeah,
doing
we
before.
went through a number of iterations. I think one of the more subtle things we changed was it used to be that D3 mouse had this implicit behavior where it would pull out the first changed touch, so that if you call D3 mouse on a touch event, which kind of inherently doesn't make sense, but it would have this behavior where it would just pull out the first changed touch and give you the position of that. And the thing that's like not great about that approach is that if you're using a mouse, it works fine, and if you're using one finger, it works fine. But if you there's 2 fingers, like, or 3 fingers, like, it's just totally chaotic and everything jumps around and it's broken. So basically, there was no way to use that API correctly with touch events. And it gave the false impression that by doing it, you could sort of magically add touch support to your visualization by using D3 mouse. So we tried to make that more explicit while still being pretty convenient. D3 pointer could work either with a mouse event or with an individual touch. And then if you touch this mouse, which we use, or the array of all touches, and a bit more explicit. They support a single touch. They treat them.
Sorry, Mike, we're getting a little bit of choppy
Of the first
from you. I don't know. Phil, are you still able to hear?
No, I couldn't hear Mike.
Sorry, I think we missed the last part of your explanation on the pointers and the multiple touches, but or it might be totally frozen. Well,
touch, and it'll do the right thing.
Okay. Sorry, Mike, we lost you for like a good 20 seconds.
Okay. Peter's, the Zoom window seems really...
Yeah, now
I think it's just the Zoom client. It's not good. I don't know.
Yeah, Zoom is it may be my Zoom like trying to keep up. I think there's a notebook, there's a migration, there's the multi-touch thing. So if folks are interested in diving deeper, they can get there. We're actually a little past time, so there was one more question I wanted to address, which was from Ben A. So once you've grokked the idiomatic ways of working, what are the best ways to contribute to D3? And I wanted to first say...
I think it's just the Zoom.
You're still getting Zoom issues. I just want to first say is fill out the D3 survey. That's a direct way to contribute to D3. Um, and someone said D3 rarely freezes though, so that's nice. I don't. In terms of answering that question though, contributing D3, I think folks, I mean, making examples is something that a lot of people can do and will do, and the more examples out there for everyone to learn from, the better. I don't know, Mike, do you want to add anything? We can try
I mean,
audio.
is my audio working or not? I don't know.
I'm currently hearing you clearly, so we can try.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what the problem was there, but I was distracted seeing if I could fix that. I mean, I think you mentioned it already in terms of examples. I mean, I think that's and tutorials. Those are, I think, the things that are the biggest help. Any sharing publicly of work that you do in D3, I think is valuable for the community. I mean, even if it's just asking questions, I think a lot of my inspiration for new visualizations comes from questions that I get from people, and also ideas for like features that we can add to the library. So I think, posting them on Twitter or sharing them in the Observable forum or on D3 Slack, those are all good ways of getting your work out there and inspiring other people to work on it, and also sort of sharing what you've learned that helps other people learn more quickly. If you do want to like contribute to new features, I think you're welcome to like file issues or even open pull requests on some of our issues or some of our repos. But I think it's a little bit harder to go that route, I would say, rather than just sort of sharing examples, because there's the need to try to think holistically about how all of the different D3 pieces fit together, which sometimes I think makes us a little bit slower for adding new features than maybe other libraries would. Like we mentioned already, this idea about iterators or iterables, right? And so we can add that to D3 array, but in fact, there's a huge like downstream work from that needs to happen. That's one of the reasons why D3 6.0 took the time that it did, because we want not just iterable support for D3 array, but to make it work for D3 selection, to make it work for D3 scale, to make it work for D3 hierarchy and all that stuff. And thinking through that, when you have like 1,000 methods or functions and you want them to behave consistently, that's one of the biggest tasks of considering these design changes. And so it can be difficult, particularly if you're new to D3, where you're like, oh, I just want to add this new feature. And then it's like, now I have to sort of think about how this feature interacts and affects the design of like 1,000 other functions. That makes it more challenging. Whereas if you're like, here's this example that I shared, or like, here's this technique, or here's this tutorial that helps other D3 users get started, like you should just share that, and I'll do whatever I can to amplify it.
And I think to add to that, there's a sort of like paving the cow paths approach here, right? Where it's like, if you make examples, you do something over and over. If it becomes clear that that's a pattern that many other people would benefit from, or something that would be an improvement to just make it easier to do it that way, then it can move quicker because you've already identified and like demonstrated that pattern over many examples. So I think that's just another reason to go that route, right?
Yeah, one of the strongest signals that this is something that we should add to the D3 library is that people are doing it already in examples, right? Like if it's like this example would be easier and that example would be easier and that example would be easier, like it's really obvious that we should do it, that it's a feature that everyone will benefit from.
Awesome. Well, we have gone a little bit over time already. I really want to thank both of you for joining on the stream today. And especially, I'd like to give Phil a special thank you and shout out for all the hard work you put in on 6.0. I mean, literally updating hundreds of examples, PRs, discussions, code, right? Everything. So Amazing work, Phil.
Yeah, +1. Thank you, Philippe. Here's my one-handed clap for you. Thank you.
And I wanted to thank everyone who's tuned in and in the chat, sharing resources and links. Thanks for joining us. This was really fun. Hopefully we can do it again before too long, for 7.0, right? We'll see. But yeah, fill out the survey.
Let's start with 6.2.
6.2, yeah. And yeah, so yeah, thanks for joining us. Make some more examples, share more cool visualization. So, we all love to see, love to do. And yeah, we'll see you next time.